All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kabbalah Café. This is our weekly look at all things Kabbalistic. And today's topic is the meaning of your name. The meaning of your name. So last week in Hebrew, and although there could be some discussion about that even in other languages, but I think primarily we're going to focus on Hebrew today. So what I want to say is as follows. Last week, just to kind of like contextualize a little bit of what we've been doing. Last week, I kind of walked you all through the events of Adam Harishon, Adam's first day. Now, you know, with my kids out of town and camp, I feel like my Sunday is a little bit quiet. I'm usually like running them around, like maybe the JCC, and they're going for football, or, you know, there's a softball situation happening. So it's a little bit quiet. Adam had a busy day. Adam was very busy that first day. And last Sunday, we spoke all about it. We talked about his activities culminating, I don't know if that's the right word, but including, not the highlight, the low light, of course, the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But amidst all of that, I pointed out something fascinating that our sages tell us, and it's in source after source. It's even in the Torah itself, and the sages elaborate on in the Midrash, that Adam, amongst the things he did day one, he named all the animals. All of the animals came before him, and he said, you are an ox, and you are a buffalo, and you are a rhino, and you are an elephant, and you are a giraffe. Okay.
Could he name crawling? You're a lizard, you are maybe he named reptiles too?
Yeah, he named all of the living creatures. All of the living creatures. He named all of them B'lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew, in the Holy Tongue. And the Torah says that all of the names that Adam gave to the animals, those were their names. And I said, and the sages elaborate, the animals actually came to Adam, they came to Adam and they said, you are our king, you are our master. And Adam says to them, no, I'm not. I'm just a guy. You know, I'm just a guy. You got the wrong guy. Let us together proclaim the majesty of God Almighty. And he introduces them to the notion of Hashem. And that's kind of how part of the day proceeds. So I asked last week, like, what's the big deal with names? Why are we making a big deal about Adam naming the animals? And I explained last week that a name is not just a name. A name is highly significant. So today what I want to do is talk about this vis-a-vis human beings. It's one thing to talk about how a human being named animals, but it's quite another when we contextualize it in the sense of human beings naming other human beings. So what I want to do is go through this brief handout that I put together. I'll pull up on screen as well. Yeah, thank you. Take and pass. And we are going to get up and running over here. All right, let me get the right file. Here we go.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When you were talking last week about the 12 or 24 hours that Adam had
Yes.
and everything,
Yes.
in our mind is he did too much in 24 hours.
Yeah.
But another verses in the Torah said that a day before Hashem is like 1,000 years. And 1,000 years.
Excellent question. Excellent question. Good. Question is a day of creation the equivalent to 12 or 24 hours as we know them, or were they longer days? That's a very good question. Because it says that to God, a day is like 1,000 years. Right? It's like the guy who prays to God and says, God, to you, a day is like 1,000 years, and $1 is like $1 million for us. God, give me $1. And God replies, tomorrow. That was a joke. That was an attempt at a joke. All right, anyway. It seems that the time then is similar to the time now, even though there are some who posit that the way to reconcile the age of the universe with the days of creation is to say that kind of the days or the time then was different. But I've seen sources that say that unless we know otherwise, the idea of Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Boker, Yom Rishon, it was evening and morning one day, evening and morning 2 days, evening 3 days, etc., doesn't seem to imply anything different than it being the standard units of time that we know. It doesn't seem like there was a massive shift. Anyway, I don't know that I can say definitively, but that's what I've seen. Now, let's jump into this text. So I prepared a text with different handouts, all from Kabbalistic sources, classic Kabbalistic sources that speak about the process of naming a human being. Okay, so let us jump into this. I'm going to read these texts. Let's see if this works. And it does. Okay, the first text we come up to is from Shar HaGilgulim. Let me explain what this text is. Shar HaGilgulim literally is translated as Gate of Reincarnation. So it's a book all about reincarnation. It's all about souls, where they come from, where they go, and where they go again. That's what this book is all about. The book comes from the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, or Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Holy Ari, the Holy Arizal. If you've been to Tzfat in Israel, you probably have encountered all things Arizal, his synagogue, his mikvah, whatever it is. So the Arizal lived in Tzfat, in Safed, Israel, one of the greatest mystics of all time. He taught Kabbalah in a brand new way, meaning in a way that was like transformative, still transformative to this day. Also, he did not write things down himself. So his student, he had many students, but one of his students, Rabbi Chaim Vital, wrote the teachings of his teacher, the Arizal. So everything that we have from the Arizal comes from Rabbi Chaim Vital's writings. So this is Rabbi Chaim Vital, Shar HaGilgulim, but the information is coming from his teacher, the Arizal. By the way, one of the unique things about the Chabad Siddur, the Chabad prayer book, is that it is according to the Nusach, according to the prayer liturgy of the Arizal. So it's based on a Kabbalistic formulation, meaning the way the Kabbalists used to pray. All right, so here we go. Prophetic spirit. So it says in Shar HaGilgulim, our first source, when a child is born and the father and mother call the child the name that comes to mind, this is not random or coincidental. Rather, God places in their mouths that very name which is necessary for that soul. So our first text, our first source tells us something quite profound. And you might have heard this before, but this is where it comes from. That when a parent names a child, even though they think they've come up with a cute name, or they've come up with a significant name, or it's a name that they love, or of a loved one, or whatever it is, whatever rationale the parent has, Rabbi Chaim Vital teaches, the Arizal teaches, Rabbi Chaim Vital writes, that God is placing in their mouth the name that is necessary for that soul, meaning it is a taste of prophecy. Ruach HaKodesh. So if I were to ask you, kind of a straight up question, hey, have you ever experienced prophecy? Has God ever spoken to you? Well, here's a short answer that I think is interesting. If you've named a child, then you have experienced prophecy. If you've been named as a child, and who hasn't, then you've also been the recipient of prophecy. Meaning your name is not random, it's not happenstance, it is very much intentional. Hey Eva, good to see you. It's very much intentional, and it's very much designed for your soul. The question is why, what does that mean, how does that work? Not only how does a prophecy work, but what does it mean that there's a name that's attributed to the soul? So let's continue. And the way we're going to develop this idea is by noting that when it comes to Hebrew, there's much more than meets the eye. Now, we've talked about Hebrew extensively in these classes, over the years. Hebrew is not a language like all other languages. Hebrew is rather the language of creation. Like we said last week, when it comes to the animals, Hebrew is not just random or happenstance. Hebrew is very significant and very highly orchestrative. The Hebrew letters are actually coordinating the energy that is associated with your name. Now, the way it works is that, as Kabbalah teaches, the Hebrew letters that you and I use actually mirror Hebrew letters above. Meaning, just like there's language in our reality, there's also language in the spiritual realms. Let's take a look at the next text. It'll become a little bit more clear when we read this. This comes from the Zohar. The Zohar is the book of radiance, the foundational book of Kabbalah, and it says as follows: just as there are lofty letters in the higher world, so too there are corresponding letters below. The upper letters are superior, the lower letters are inferior. Each letter corresponds one to the other. By the way, I love the way that's formulated. The Zohar doesn't say, just like we have letters, so too there are letters above. It goes the opposite. Just like there are letters above, so too there are letters below. By the way, this is highly intentional and highly important, and let me explain. So I think many of us would think of divine parallels as follows. I have this attribute, I have this tendency. Where does it come from above? Meaning there must, again, if you're thinking Kabbalistically, the thought is, well, where does this come from above? What's the shoresh? What's the source above? Kabbalah frames it intentionally and directly the other way around. It starts off above, and then it's nishtalshal, and then it emanates below. So I'll give you an example that I've used before in other contexts. The example that I'm going to give is of an apple. Okay? So an apple, I guess it depends on the apple that you get, but let's say it's a sweet apple. So you take the apple and you bite into, you say a blessing, say a bracha, you bite into it, and it's sweet. Where does that come from? Where does the sweetness of the apple come from? I mean, you put a seed into the ground. I don't know, if you ate this seed, would it be sweet? Probably not. So where does this, I wouldn't recommend it either, because you don't want an apple tree growing inside you. That would be weird. Anyway, but right, it wouldn't be sweet. So where does the sweetness of the apple come from? Where does it come from? So I'm sure botanically, or whatever the right word is, on an agricultural level, you can get an explanation of where the sweetness comes from, and how that's embedded in the whatever it is of the seed. But Kabbalistically, it's taught that a sweet apple comes from the attribute of chesed. What is chesed? Kindness. Chesed is kindness, and it's the source of all sweet things. So sweet apples are coming from chesed. My question is, what does that mean? So I'll give you a simple example. You're walking into a coffee shop. And the only reason why you're walking into a coffee shop is because you want a drink of coffee, because you're maybe, you're going somewhere and you need a little jolt of energy, something like that. And you're walking in, and somebody walks in before you, and they hold the door open for you. And you say, wow, that's so sweet, thank you. You call that sweet. Let me ask you a question. Is that really sweet? Is there a taste to the action? Of course not. It's not sweet like an apple, but still, human beings, you and I might call it sweet. Sweet in the sense that it's kind, it's loving, we call it sweet. So just like in language, we recognize that there's a literal way of, or there's a more physical application maybe, or manifestation of that word, meaning sweet can physically taste sweet, versus something being like an action that is, sweet in nature. So too we can understand that the same thing applies to other things in language. Everything, I call this the law of Kabbalistic gravity. Everything that begins above comes below. Who was it? Newton, that got hit in the head by an apple and then realized gravity, something like that, right? Or maybe he invented figs. I forget which one Newton did. Anyway, that's a joke. So the fig Newton, right? Anyway, so what happens? So something begins above and it falls below. Everything that exists in our reality comes from above. So the Hebrew letters that we have, the language that we have, is really coming from a higher source. And as the Zohar says, that's the primary location. This is the secondary location. Give you an example. I'll give you an example. I think it's the Shalah. I don't remember. Might be the Shalah. Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, who wrote a book called the Shnei Luchot Habrit, the acronym of which is Shalah. Shalah HaKadosh. If you know any Horowitzes, they probably come from the Shalah. And they don't eat turkey, as you might know. Anyway, there's a few things. The Shalah. He famously said that turkey is not kosher, or he didn't believe turkey is not kosher, so his family doesn't eat it, his descendants don't eat it, but everyone else typically does. All right, getting back to the point here. So it says, I think the Shalah writes it, that Torah, so there's two phrases. One is that Torah speaks here and alludes to, hints to, things happening up there. Meaning, Torah tells us a story about Avram, about Yitzchak, about Yaakov, about Yosef, about Moshe. Torah tells us laws about sending away the mother bird and putting up a fence around your roof. And Torah tells us, Torah speaks down here, but also alludes to spiritual things. So as you're reading a story about Avram and Sarah, you're also realizing it's not just a physical story. There's a spiritual story happening. Or a mitzvah is not just a physical mitzvah, but there's a spiritual dynamic behind it. That's one way of understanding it. That Torah speaks below and hints to spiritual reality. The other way to understand it is the opposite. Torah speaks, Torah medaber be'elyonim. Torah speaks about the things above and only hints to the things below. That's a different way of understanding it. In other words, where's the primary space of Torah? Is it down here? But you can also infer spiritual truths, or does it mainly, primarily speak to the spiritual realm? And just you and I also happen to understand one layer of it, and so when we're reading a story about our patriarchs or matriarchs, or about, Korach, and about the red heifer, etc., when we're reading these things, we can also apply it to ourselves, but primarily it speaks above. Meaning it's a question of focus. What's primary, what's secondary? Is this primary and that secondary? Or is that primary and this is secondary? And it's a matter of perspective. It's almost like the famous, mystical debate whether the world is obvious and God is a possibility, or whether God is obvious and the world is a possibility. Two completely different ways of looking at things. Which one?
Heaven is first and we are secondary.
That makes sense. The deeper understanding that heaven is real and this, maybe, that makes sense. That makes sense when you're studying Kabbalah. But when you're walking and roaming the world and encountering all the things on a day-to-day basis, we typically take this for granted. Meaning we take this as being absolute, as being solid. We perceive this reality as real. And then we say, wait a second. Hold on. Where did this come from? How could it be? It didn't just make itself, right? Things don't just make themselves. It's got to have a source. And then we peel the layers of our reality. We peel back the layers to get to the core. But typically, we always begin. Good morning. Good to see you. We begin from a position of I exist. Now the only question is, how did I get here? So what you know for sure is I exist. The only question is, how did it happen? Whereas the other perspective, which is very hard for a human being to live by, is God exists. Us, how do we get here? Meaning, it's almost like, if God's the only true reality, then how do we think we exist? Then how do we have a sense of ego? How do we have a sense of consciousness? Where does that come from? Where does that sense of, self and differentiation of self, where does that come from? In a world that's complete oneness. In a world that's only Hashem, only God. How do we feel separate? It's almost like, and there's an example that I've given before, it's almost like if you're imagining a story in your mind, right? And you're imagining you're imagining a film or a novel or, I don't know, whatever story you're imagining. Not a real story. You're making up a story in your imagination. Imagine if those characters inside your imagination start feeling a sense of self and self-awareness. They're not even real. They're inside you. What does that mean? How could they possibly feel a sense of self? How could they start sensing? Imagine you're thinking about, Bob and Sally, picking random names, Bob and Sally, and they live, I'm going to say in France, but why would a Bob and a Sally live in France? I don't even know what's happening here. But anyway, imagine they're living somewhere, right? And you're imagining a story, and then somehow in this story, these characters begin thinking that they're real. And begin imagining, we're real. Do we even have a source? I don't know. As they're still inside the mind of the author. Doesn't even make sense. That's the real question. That's the mystery of creation. It's not, if we're here, how does God exist? That's not the question. The question is, if God exists, how are we here? And how do we perceive ourselves as self-identifying creatures? All of this is what the Kabbalists refer to as the duality, or the tension between dat elyon and dat tachton. Higher perception and lower perception. Lower perception is, we exist. God, I think so. Higher perception, divine perception is, God exists. We, down here, maybe. Probably not separate. Probably part of the source. Anyway, so the point of this Zohar that we read a few moments ago, that little excerpt, says that the letters above, right, have corresponding letters below. But what's the primary? The letters above. The source is always primary. We see this today when it comes to coding. And by the way, so we have Matt with us. Matt is an expert in all these things. But recently, due to the power of AI and Claude, so I have dabbled in a few projects that have been helpful around the house for certain things with code. But it's amazing. It's like if you want something to happen. So the cool thing now, at least for a total amateur like me, is that I can speak a command or share a wish or desire, and it could be like, and then the software could be like, so this is what we need to write, and it'll create the code. Don't worry, no one should get any concern that there's any high level tinkering happening. It's all basic stuff. The point is that if you want something to work in the software realm, it's got to be written in code. And code is what powers a thing to work. And it's like, okay, so if you want something to show up, so what's primary? The software that's running, meaning to the user, or is it the code that's driving it in the background? The answer is, it's all the code. If the code doesn't work, the interface that you interact with is not going to work. So it's all meaning what you see is the end result of hundreds, thousands, whatever lines of code that's powering it. That's what you see. So that's what, again, a modern example or modern kind of understanding of what the Zohar says 2,000 years ago. The letters above are the primary, and they power the letters below. What we see as letters, we only see them because of the letters above. Let's get back into the text. Okay, we're going to get back into the handout. And, that was letters of light. Yvonne, let me give you this handout. Good to see you. How's your arm? Recovering? Hopefully. Okay. All right. Back to our sources. Here we go. Next, signs. Now, this is very interesting. This comes from the Radvaz, Rabbi David ibn Zimra. And he wrote a book explaining the Hebrew letters. And he explains the meaning of the Hebrew word for letter. Okay, maybe I should explain. He's explaining all the Hebrew letters, but in that process, he defines and describes the Hebrew word for letter, which is ot. Ot, aleph, vav, taf, ot, not ot, like O-A-T. But in Hebrew, ot means letter. Otiot are letters plural. So let's go, signs. The Hebrew letters are allusions and signs pointing to wondrous and awesome spiritual realities. This is why they are called otiot, signs in the sense of signs and miracles. An ot in Hebrew doesn't only mean a letter, it also means a sign or a wonder. For example, before the Exodus, God says, "V'nasati otot umoftim." I will create signs and wonders in the land, meaning the 10 plagues, splitting of the sea. So those are referred to as signs and wonders. So the question then is, what's the conceptual connection between an ot as a miracle and an ot as a letter? And so the Rambam explains that letters are called signs, like signs and miracles. Why? Because every Hebrew letter corresponds to is a sign, is like it reveals something, a greater truth, a higher truth. Just like, what is a miracle? A miracle reveals a higher truth, a higher reality. So we go through our lives, we go through our days, and things can seem mundane and ordinary. What is a miracle? A miracle jumps out and says, God's here, right? There is a God. There is a creator. The creator is looking after you. The creator is taking care of you, etc. That's what a miracle is. A miracle is a declaration of God that says, I'm here. It's like God peeking from behind the curtain and saying, hello, I was here the whole time. It might have taken a miracle to show up, to see it, but that's the role of a miracle. A miracle is allowing the truth to show up. And so a letter is the same thing. A letter, every Hebrew letter, is a symbol. It's a sign. It's a wonder that reveals something higher, a greater truth that's deeper than itself. Which takes us to our next source. Okay? So now, every soul above has a spiritual source. And as we said before, all spiritual energy is coded by divine letters, by divine language. And the same thing is true with a soul. A soul has a name above. Let's read this inside. This is Rabbi Chaim Vital again, Shar HaGugulim. This is from the gate of reincarnation. God places in their mouths, the mouths of the parents, that very name which is necessary for that soul, corresponding to the specific source in the sphirot above from where the soul is hewn. This name is marked above in God's heavenly throne. Every soul comes from above. Every soul corresponds to a specific type of energy. As we've said many times, there are different personalities. Some people are more chesed, some people are more gevura, some people have more innate kindness, some people are more disciplinarians, some people are more compassionate, some people are more ambitious, etc. If you go through all the different sphirot energies, different personalities, different types of souls. Every soul has a personality. And that personality is not decided below. Yes, you could say that there is some element of, let's say, nurture, but a lot of it is nature. Meaning a lot of it is the nature of the soul and where that soul comes from. And so every soul is associated with a sphere of energy above. And that is associated with a name. And all those names are etched, as Rabbi Chaim Vital teaches, writes, based on the Arizal, every soul's name is etched in the divine throne. And a parent is given the prophecy to be able to channel that name, meaning tune in to that broadcast above and recognize that name. And so even though the parent thinks, oh, I've always liked that name, or I don't know how that name came to me, or I'm naming the child after a loved one, whatever the calculation is in the parent's mind, it's irrelevant. Sorry. It's not as relevant as the fact that God is making sure that the name that is given to the child down here is compatible with the name of that soul above in the spiritual realms. Every soul is etched in the heavenly throne. I think of it as like the Stanley Cup in the sky. I'm kidding. You know the Stanley Cup, the hockey trophy, where all the names of the folks in the teams are engraved in the Stanley Cup? Anyway, that is the case. Point is that a name is not just a name. I wrote in the email, what did Shakespeare write? A rose by
any other name would smell as sweet.
Would smell as sweet. But a person by any other name would not be the same. Because a person's names are not interchangeable. A name is tied to your soul, to your spiritual DNA. the name that you have below, the letters of your name down here correspond to the letters above that help shape the energy of your soul. So just like we said last week, that Adam, who named the animals, was able to look at an animal and divine almost and see the spiritual root of this animal and thus not give it a name, but reveal here its name above. The same thing is true with every parent. Every parent has the power. They don't realize it. They don't know it. They could deny it. It doesn't make a difference. Every parent, when they're naming a child, is having the same experience as Adam Harishon, the first human being, Adam, who looked at the animal and said, you are a giraffe, whatever it is, but in Hebrew, whatever that is in Hebrew, right? That's the prophecy, yeah.
So if we took the letters of our names and found the value of each letter, and it would correspond what that letter meant in the Torah, would that...
So you're asking, could we deconstruct this by using gematria numerology? So here's the truth. Numerology is just one method of getting to the deeper meaning of the letters. There's numerology. There's the shape of the letters. There's the meaning of the name of the letters, because every letter means something. Aleph means something. Bet means something. Gimel means something. So every letter has a numerology, has a shape, has a meaning. Every letter has, I'm sure there's a few more layers. And so the question becomes, when you're trying to kind of deconstruct this, like, okay, so let's start with this name. What does it mean? It's going to be very hard for us to extrapolate that, because it's hard to know exactly how that, which process to use to kind of like unravel that truth, to unwind it. Numerology might be one method, but there might be other methods, and we might have a combination of methods. And even within numerology, there are many, many different forms of numerology to arrive at different meanings. My point is to say that I'm more comfortable saying that Kabbalah teaches that names are highly significant, inspired by divine prophecy, and connected to your name above than I am to say, and this is how to figure it out. That I'm already not comfortable with saying, because I don't know that there's an easy formula that you can plug it in and be like, oh, okay. I mean, maybe, right, Matt, maybe we need to do some coding over here and get some sort of, get some sort of software going where you can say your name and find out what's going on. But I'm sure there's some sort of methodology that's taught. I don't know if I'm comfortable saying that definitely it's numerology specifically. It could be a factor, a whole host of factors that come together to kind of describe the the meaning or the of the different letters. Also, when you think about letters, it's not about only the different letters, it's about the specific order of the letters. So which letter of your name comes first, which comes second? Because the first letter of your name is the primary energy and everything else is more secondary. That's why it's first as opposed to second. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about on this and a lot that I don't know. But I will say this, that is well documented in Kabbalah, that number one, names are prophetic. It's not just random or happenstance or cute or symbolic, but they're highly significant. The names, the letters below correspond to letters above. Every soul has a whole language above, meaning has a name above. It's even marked on the Kisei HaKavod, the heavenly throne. And parents, when they name a child, they're channeling that down. Now, the only question that remains to be asked and answered is, so if the soul has a name above, which corresponds to its energy, then why is it important that that name be mirrored below? Meaning, let's say your soul has a name. Let's say my soul is called Yankel above. Let's just say, right? So then, is it that important that I be called Yankel? What if I'm called Ari? Like why would it have to correspond? So everyone's calling you by name. That's your lower name. And who says it has to correspond to the higher name? Why does it have to be matchy-matchy, as the kids like to say? Does it have to be like perfectly in sync? Right? Why is that relevant? Okay, so this takes us to the last text of the handout. And the last text, which is on the flip side of the page, says the following. This comes from the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. And he writes in one of his discourses, and just so you know, this is from the year 1803. 1803. 5563. That's the year right there. 5563, 1803. The name, he says, is irrelevant to the essential core of the soul, meaning the name below. However, the name does relate to the outer dimension of the soul. Calling the person by name connects and binds the soul's vitality to the body, and this is what I want to talk about right now. What the Alter Rebbe, what Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi writes is something phenomenal. He says, in truth, you could be called by any name here. You could be called by anything, right? Yeah, you could be called Yankel. Go back to Yankel, right? Doesn't make a difference. However, it does make a difference on one level. Meaning, the name is never going to, your soul has a name above, and that's never going to change. So why is it important that your name below corresponds to your name above? For one purpose. And it's a very important purpose, and that is to bind your soul with your body. And that happens down here, right? What happens? What happens, people always ask me the question, when does life begin? I get asked that question often for many, many reasons. Beginning of life, there are end of life questions, obviously, but then there's also beginning of life questions. You're like, when does life begin? Does Judaism believe, does Kabbalah believe that life begins at conception? Or maybe at birth? Like, when does life begin? There's the joke that, for a Jewish mother, when does life begin? When the kids graduate medical school. I mean, that's the joke, right? That's always the joke. But on a serious note, like, when does life begin? And so you have all these different sources that seem to imply different things. Like the Talmud says in Tractate Nida that, the fetus in its mother's womb is like a folded writing tablet, and its head is between its knees. We call that, I guess, the fetal position. And there's a light shining above its head, and it sees from one end of the world to the other end of the world, and an angel teaches it the entire Torah. I don't know if it says an angel. It's taught the entire Torah. And before it emerges into this world, an angel slaps it on its mouth, and it forgets the entire Torah. And that's how the Talmud describes the soul.
But that soul has some hints or whatever he learns in there.
Yes, there is residual knowledge that we have even after we forget, which is why when we study Torah and it resonates, it kind of feels like an old tune that you once knew. It's like, sounds familiar. That sounds right. Makes sense. That resonates. Doesn't resonate, meaning there's something inside. The ground has already been paved. There's, that knowledge never really fully disappears. It's almost like, I'm going to use a random example. I apologize for the randomness of this example. When it comes to Scotch, it's like a Scotch example. Whatever, here we go. Scotch. So there's a big controversy. There's a big controversy about sherry casks. Scotch aged in sherry casks. It's like a big trend. I don't know how big the trend is, but there's a lot of companies that their higher end scotches are aged in sherry casks. So the question is it kosher? So first of all, Scotch in general is kosher. Why is it kosher? And sometimes some do have a kosher symbol, some don't. But if it's pure Scotch, you don't really need a kosher symbol. Why? Because people enjoy it. No, I'm kidding. But because you know how it's made, and there's very tight regulations on how it's made, and you know that it's only made from very natural ingredients, etc. However, when the bottle says aged in sherry casks, now you have a problem. Why? Because what's sherry? Help me out here. What is sherry? Sherry is a type of wine, right? It's a type of wine that is not necessarily a kosher wine. So what happens? They get from France. Is that where they make sherry, in France? Yeah, I think so. France. And they ship them to Scotland, where they're making Scotch. Hence the name Scotch. They ship them there. They ship these casks. Sometimes they ship them whole. Sometimes they ship them, they take them apart into planks and they ship them and then they build them back over there. And then the people that are making the scotch, all the Glens, Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, Glenmorangie, all the Glens, right? All the Glens. The good friends Glen, right? They age the scotch in these barrels. The question is, are they meshuggah? You're importing a barrel. You can't make your own barrels. The whole point, though, is that when it's sitting for whatever it is, however long it is, in a sherry cask, it gets some of the flavor, it gets some of the color, it's a little bit darker, it's something. And they even write on the bottle, aged in sherry casks. This is not just scotch. It's not just 12 years. It's 12 years inside a sherry cask. Opa, that's the whole thing. Huh?
It's adulterated.
The question is it kosher?
Well, yeah,
That's the question. If it's not kosher, if it's not a kosher barrel, does that mean that the scotch aged in that barrel is not kosher? So this becomes one of the great debates of the modern era. You have people that are, just adamant, absolutely, it's kosher. The amount of sherry that would have been, I don't know what the right word is, leached, maybe, into the scotch is so minimal. It's less than 1/60th. It's not, it's something typically if the mixture is, if the ratio is less than 1/60th in halakha and Jewish law, we consider it to be insignificant. It's insignificant. It's whatever. The counter argument is insignificant. They put it on the label. What kind of insignificant? They're advertising it as sherry casks. It's not so insignificant. You paid more for it, right? How insignificant is it to everybody in the entire operation here? They did it. They shipped it. They imported it. They put it on the label. You bought it. You paid more for it. How could you consider it to be insignificant? Anyway, there's a big controversy. I heard anecdotally several years ago, many years ago, that the London Bet Din, the big rabbinic council in London, that also has a kashrut, arm to it. I think it was rumored. I say rumored because I read it. I didn't hear them say it directly, but I read that they had said that anyone who is uncomfortable drinking scotch with sherry casks, fine, but just drop off your bottles by the London Bet Din. We'll take care of it. we'll put it to good use. Anyway, I don't know if they're still in that position that it's fine, or if they change. Depending on who you ask, you'll get different opinions. I don't even know why I'm saying this at this point. Anybody know why we got into sherry casks? Oh, the residue. What's the point? The point is when Torah sits inside the soul, spirit of the fetus, of the unborn child, for 9 months, even if the angel, whatever it is, not right, deletes it. I mean, if you know about computers, files are never really deleted. There's always something. There's always some sort of residue, unless you're overwriting it, right? But there's always something. There's always some sort of residue that remains, like the sherry and the sherry cask, depending on who you ask, right? But there's always some sort of residue that remains behind. And the same thing is true with the Torah that we learn. But I raise that for another point, and that is, so when does life begin? When does the soul connect with the body? So in utero, before the child is born, is there a soul? Yes. It says that there's a candle burning above its head. That refers to the soul. There's a soul. But the soul is not integrated into the body yet. It's there in proximity, but it's not like fully integrated. So when does it become integrated? At birth. At birth, the soul and the body become integrated. But even then, it's not fully integrated. According to Kabbalah and according to what we just read, I'm explaining now the last little paragraph that we read. According to Kabbalah, do you know when the soul really becomes integrated with the body? When it gets the name. When the child receives his or her name. Whether it's at the brit, at the circumcision for the boy, or at the baby naming ceremony for the girl. Either way, it's when the child is given the name. When that prophetic inspiration is manifest in the act of the child being given a name, and that name due to divine prophecy and inspiration, is a match to the name, to the soul's real name above, right? That's what helps the soul integrate with the body. If it wouldn't have the right name, it couldn't integrate with the body. It's only by having, and this is what the Alter Rebbe said in that excerpt that we just read, when the soul is given the correct name, it can then integrate with the body, it can then come in fully into the body. That is why it's so important to have the right name. If I'm not mistaken, it's been so long, it's been a long time since I've dabbled in Superman. Not like I ever dabbled heavily, but even even peripherally. I think, didn't Superman have a different name?
Clark Kent.
No, I know that. No, but Superman's not an actual name either. It's just it's like, hey, Superman. No, but I mean like in his home, in Krypton, wherever he came from, in Krypton, whatever it was. I think he had another name. Someone Google this and let me know if he had another name. I think there was like another name. And my point of all this, as I wade into the uncertainty of did he have actually another name, is to say that unlike Superman, we need to have the same name all the way through. Meaning our name in the other world above needs to be the same name in this world below in order for the soul to function properly and to integrate with the body. It's got to be the right name for that integration. If it's not the right name, it's not going to integrate properly. And therefore, that's why parents are given the ability to have that prophetic insight. Otherwise, it would be a waste of prophecy. Who cares? Let the parents name whatever they want. It's like, have you ever seen, like with a pet, it's like, someone loses the pet. God forbid.
So, Rabbi?
Yeah.
In answer to your question, yes, Superman's birth name is Kal-El, and he is also known by various aliases such as the Man of Steel and the Last Son of Krypton.
Thank you very much. Kal-El. And Kal-El is like God's name. Right? Kal-El is God's name.
His father was biological father.
I'm saying this is the very Jewish and Hebrew connotations here. Kal-El. The whole point here, though, is that Kal-El and Clark Kent are not the same name. But you and I have to have the same name. And I was going to give the example also, by the way, of pets. There's someone, God forbid, loses a pet and posts on Nextdoor or whatever it is, right? Like, I've lost my pet, dog, Fido. Can we do Fido? Is Fido a name? Was that a name ever? I think it was a name. And, I lost the Fido, and then someone, like 2 months later, someone's like, or whatever, the guy's walking down the street and sees the dog. Oh my gosh, it's my dog, Fido. Like, Fido? That's Bark. I don't know. Again, I'm struggling here with names of dogs. That's not Fido, that's Bark. Oh, you named the Bark, you named Fido. I don't know if it works the same with animals. It might not. But with human beings, we did say that Adam named the animals, but that wasn't the specific animal name of that specific animal. It was like the general species name. Kelev is the Hebrew word for that. But when it comes to human beings, the specific name is highly intentional. And so what we have here is something phenomenal. That what seems to be perhaps very external and non-significant, meaning a name, is in Kabbalah very important. And again, I think the way to think about this is, if you were alone on a desert island, and no one else was around, would you need a name for yourself? Most of us would say no. Why would I need a name? I don't need a name, right? Like, I only need a name if someone needs to call me. If no one's calling me, I don't need a name. I could just be me. I don't need a name. Kabbalah says not so simple. Not so simple. A name is a reflection. Your name, your given name, is a reflection of who you really are. Number one. Number two, the name helps your soul integrate with your body. Okay, so with this in mind, we can get into our text. What I want to do today is complete chapter 5. Chapter 5 of the book that we're studying, called Creation and Redemption. And I'm going to pass around these copies. If you don't mind, take one and pass down.
How do we know if we have the right name? Is there any?
We believe that we have the right name. Yeah. Now, it's very important to recognize that there are some situations, there are some scenarios where Jewish law halakha tells us to maybe change the name.
When people are sick.
Yes. So, for example, if somebody gets sick, then, and typically like a serious illness, then there's an option to explore of changing the name. And the reason for that is with the understanding that, again, the same concept that the name below reflects the name above. So what we're trying to do by changing the name below is to create a change above as well, maybe to try to kickstart a change above, to then change the mazal, to change the destiny. So if that name person was destined to, God forbid, be sick, then maybe this new name of the person maybe should not have that same destiny, if that makes sense. So we add a name, modify the name, whatever it is, to try to kind of change the thing. But typically that's done not just willy-nilly. I mean, it's not done casually. It's done in a very serious situation where it's like, that's almost, I'm not going to say a last resort, but it's usually reserved for something very, very serious. By the way, there is another instance of a name change. I don't know how this fits in that well, but this is another instance. And I'm thinking now about my brother-in-law, who's the Chabad rabbi in Frisco, Texas, or as we call him, the Frisco Yid. So anyway, and he's celebrating today his 13th anniversary. So Mazel Tov, Mendy and Mushki, in case they're watching at some point. Hey guys, shout out. So anyway, so when he married, so this is my wife Leah's brother, is named Mendy, or Menachem Mendel. So he married a young woman named Chaya Mushka. She goes by Mushki. Well, her father is also Menachem Mendel. Her father, Rabbi Block, Rabbi Mendy or Mendel Block in Plano, Texas. So his name is Menachem Mendel. My brother-in-law's name is Menachem Mendel, and there's a wrinkle when it comes to halacha that says that if a young woman marries a guy with the same name as her father, the guy should change his name, or add on another name, so that she wouldn't call her husband by the same name as she calls her father, as a sign of respect to her father. Very interesting. So he is now Yisrael Menachem Mendel, not just Menachem Mendel. So he added a name to. So that's, I don't know what that does above or how that works and how that fits in, but that's more of a pragmatic thing, and I think it's a fascinating concept. Anyway, there's a lot to discuss about names. There's way more than we're talking about, but I did want to cover. I think I compiled like 5 or 6 different Kabbalistic, short Kabbalistic excerpts on it to kind of round out this conversation. So let's jump now into our main text. And what we're going to do is begin from, hold on. We're going to begin on page, we might have done this before, but I want to get a running start, on page 70. Okay, and the core of this discourse at this point of where we're up to is to differentiate between the 6 attributes and the 7th, which is Malchut, between Chesed, Gevura, Teferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, those 6, and the 7th, which is Malchut. There's a difference between them. We would typically refer to them as the 7 midot, the 7 kind of emotively driven divine attributes. But within the 7, there's really 2 teams, Team 6 and Team 1, or team, in Kabbalah we call them Zah, Ze'er Anpin, the small face, that's referring to the 6, Chesed through Yesod, and then Malchut is the 7. So Zah and Malchut, that's the two sides, as it were. So here he differentiates between those 2 teams. Supernal attributes. And so it is with the supernal attributes. They are revelations from the infinite light because of the infinite light. Although they are on a level that relates to the worlds, they nonetheless do not exist for the worlds, meaning the first 6 of these midot, of these divine attributes, They're shining because God is shining. They're not necessarily shining for the worlds. Now, they shine to the worlds, but not necessarily for the worlds. Let's continue. Not so in the case of the attribute of Malchut. Malchut is a revelation from the infinite light for the worlds, as in the saying, there is no king without a nation. And it is the creatures of the lower world that awaken the desire for his kingship, as in the saying, God says, recite for me verses of kingship, so that you proclaim me as king over you. Meaning that we are the ones that stir God's desire to be king, just like in the human example, the idea of leadership or sovereignty is only stirred by the people that awaken that, so too it is on some level with God. And the beginning of the awakening of his kingship came through Adam, who accepted the kingship, page 72, of heaven and said, Hashem Malach, God has reigned. So the revelation of the other spiritual attributes, meaning the other 6, comes about because of the blessed infinite light, meaning because God is shining. As it says, for 6 days God made the heaven and the earth. Now, by the way, that line, for 6 days God made the heaven and the earth, so Kabbalah says it's not just that God created the world in 6 days, but God manifested 6 days worth of attributes. 6 days, one attribute per day. Sunday, Chesed; Monday, Gevura; Tuesday, Tiferes. By the way, that's why Mondays seem so miserable for many people, because it's the Gevura energy, right? It's that kind of like the tough Gevura energy. Sunday, though, Chesed, love, go outside, enjoy the day. It's beautiful out there, right? That's the Sunday energy. Tuesday, Tiferet, it's harmony, compassion, good things, lots of blessings on a Tuesday. Anyway, every day has a different energy. So just to explain that line, for 6 days God made the heaven and the earth, it doesn't say in 6 days God made the heaven and the earth. It says for 6 days God made the heaven and the earth, meaning God made heaven and earth through 6 days, through the attributes of the 6 days. So all of those are self-directed. God directs those energies outward. But the revelation of the attribute of Malchut back inside took place through Adam, since it is a revelation from the infinite light for the worlds. Meaning the 7th is a responsive element. You know, in every relationship, there are some things that you are happy to just, unilaterally provide or shine or reveal, and some things someone's got to pull it out of you. Someone's got to evoke it from you. That's what Malchut is. Malchut needs to be evoked by the other. Let's continue, and now we get into names. And that's going to connect with what we've been talking about these last 2 weeks. Malchut is therefore called name, as in the saying, his name was proclaimed king over them. For just as the general purpose of a name is for the sake of another person, likewise the Sephira of Malchut is a revelation that occurs for the sake of others. For the sake of the worlds. So here he talks about the general notion of a name. So a name typically is for the other person. I don't need a name. It's for you to call me. For me, I'm happy to be called me. If I'm alone in my room and there's no one around, do I need a name? I don't think so. It's just me, alone. If you're around, now I need a name, but I don't need a name for me, I need a name for you. So the concept of a name is like Malchut. I don't need Malchut for myself. I don't need to be a king. If it's just me on a desert island, I'm not a king. I only need to be a king if you're around and you need me to be your leader. Then I need to be a king. So now, the next paragraph, look what he says. And this is what we did today. Now, although a name exists for the sake of others, the essence of the name is for oneself. And this should sound familiar. This is everything we discussed today. Since in it and through it, page 74, that vitality flows and is revealed. Meaning, a person's name is what channels their soul's energy into the world and into their body. This is, by the way, the paradox of a name is that on the surface, you only need it for someone else. I don't need it for myself. In truth, you also need it for yourself. That's why it has to be the right name. That's why God has to, get the name, make sure the name is right, etc. The same back inside, 74 at the top. The same is true of the Sephira of Malchut. It is in it and through it that the worlds are created and given life, and that's very important. Malchut is not just how God responds to the needs of a world of creatures. Adam says to God, we need a king. And God says, okay, if you need a king, I'll be your king. It's more than that. It's not just it's not just kind of a happenstance relationship. It's very much divinely orchestrated. It's necessary. It's through it and in it that the vitality flows to the worlds. Energy, life force flows to our reality through the energy of Malchut. Malchut is not some sort of passive respondent to something evoking it. It's rather actively directing energy, just like our name is directing the energy from above, the soul above, into our soul below and into our body here. And let's continue. And although the general creation and flow of vitality to the worlds is channeled through the Sephira of Malchut, as we just said, as it corresponds to a name. Nevertheless, the Sephira of Malchut is referred to by the appellation, meaning by the term name, since it is a revelation that occurs for the sake of the worlds. At the end of the day, Malchut and that flow is for the worlds, and the truth is, the name of a person, we could construe it the same way. And here we come full circle. We started off the class by saying that names are highly important and highly significant, and the name below corresponds to the name above. But then the question becomes, why does the soul even need a name above? What is the value of that name? Meaning, we said that the name below should match the name above because that's how we channel the energy into the body, and that's how we make sure that everything is right. But why does the soul need a name in the first place? Why did the soul need a name above? Oh, because it has a specific energy? That's true, but why does it need a name? I think we just landed on the answer. The answer is because as it will fulfill its mission, it needs to have its identity called forth. It needs to have some sort of match with the body that it is placed into. And because of that, it needs to carry its name from the source all the way into our world and all the way into the body. It's got to be consistent all the way through. And so this is the paradox of name. Maybe not paradox, maybe the duality of what a name is. On the one hand, it comes as a response of the needs of others. And on the other hand, that's on the one hand, meaning I don't need a name for me, you need me to have a name. But on the other hand, I definitely also need a name. I need a name because that's what matches the soul to the body. That's what integrates the soul with the body. By the way, I didn't mention before, maybe I did. I meant to. That is why we seek to do the naming of a child, of a baby, right away. Now we try to do the Brit, the circumcision for a boy right away. We can't do it right away. Baby has to be healthy enough. And the minimum age, I think this is even, medically speaking of, I'm going to mess up the words perhaps, but the coagulation, coagulation, there you go, of the blood, right, takes maybe a week or so till the blood can, till it kind of can regulate that and wouldn't just continue bleeding and whatever if you did the circumcision earlier. So there's something to that effect that you kind of need. But at the earliest opportunity, you do that. And then for a girl, you do it at the earliest opportunity to name that child because the name is so important. So as we wrap up today's class, I think it's important to embrace our names. Now, if you have a Hebrew name, great. If you don't have a Hebrew name, there's an app for that. I'm kidding. But there's, there's ways to kind of figure out, what that would be. But in researching this, Kabbalah definitely speaks about the Hebrew letters correspond to the Hebrew letters above. But in other sources, it seems to imply that when it comes to names, every name is significant. Certainly, we would say specifically, certainly we would say that Hebrew names maybe carry extra significance. But in general, a name is significant. And it's not just because it's your name. I'll tell you a story. I have it. So my son Shaya, who's 14, my son Shaya just graduated 8th grade. I don't know that I graduated 8th grade when I was a kid. I think I finished 8th grade. But he graduated 8th grade with the whole thing, whole ceremony, pomp and circumstance. He's going next year, please God, to Chicago, to high school. So we told him recently it was nice knowing you. I'm kidding. So anyway, so that's that. So he is spending the summer, 7 weeks, in Morristown, New Jersey, at a program that I was at when I was his age. When I was finishing 8th grade, I joined this program. It's called YSP, Yeshiva Summer Program. It's a bit of a hybrid between like learning and fun and camp. So it's not like camp, which is all fun trips and sports and activities. It's also not yeshiva, where it's all learning all day. It's kind of like a bit of a hybrid. I asked him, we were speaking on Friday, so I said, what's the biggest difference between, camp and YSB? And he says, the learning is much longer. And they used to learn for like an hour or two in the morning. Here he's learning to 2:15 in the afternoon. From the morning to 2:15, it's kind of like yeshiva style. And then 2:15 for the rest of the day, well, till like dinner time is like camp style. And then they learn again at night. So anyway, so it's kind of like getting them ready for the next step. But not really, because then they learn from 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. That's all the way. That's going to start in a few months. My point of this is, I want to make this about me for a second. When I went to YSP, so my name, as you know, is Ari, but my real name, which you might not know, is Yehuda Aryeh. My full name is Yehuda Aryeh. I go by my middle name, Aryeh, by an abbreviated version of that, Ari. But my full name is Yehuda Aryeh. Most people in my family, for whatever reason, we go by our middle names. Like Leah is Devorah Leah. Nassan is Moshe Nassan. Mendel is Menachem Mendel. Shalom is the exception, Shalom Dovber. Chaim Yeshaya is Shaya. Shlomo Eliezer is Eli. And Rivka is Riva, she has one name. Okay. So, my point is, I go to YSP. I'm a shy kid from Pittsburgh. I was shy. Maybe still am, I don't know, but I was. And they looked at my registration, or they had my name on the roster, and they called me Yehuda Sollish. And I was so shy and embarrassed. I was a little kid, I don't know, I was like 13. I didn't really correct that mistake. And the staff, like my friends who knew me called me Ari, but like the staff called me Yehuda. And it went almost the whole summer before I kind of said, hey, So I told Shaya, because I want to make sure that, because he's listed as Chaim Yeshaya, I want to make sure that they know he's Shaya. So I asked him, do they know your name? Yeah, so I'm only saying this anecdotally to say that our names are important and they mean something to us. And, maybe as a 13-year-old kid, maybe I didn't, immediately correct it, but, there's something special about our names, something special about our Hebrew names, and may indeed we embrace our names, appreciate our names, and allow that energy to help unlock our potential and our mission and our destiny in this world as it works with the body that has been paired up with it. And let us say, Amen. Thank you very much for joining me today for Kabbalah Café. Hope you enjoyed it. We've enjoyed, Mark is not here, but Mark helped us out with this new machine. So thank you, Mark. And this week, we have a lot of fun stuff happening. Tomorrow, we have a super grand Taste in Torah Club with an off-the-charts menu. So that's tomorrow, a lot of good stuff tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. We have the Torah class Tuesday night. We have JLI, our final session of Sunday and Civics, on Wednesday. And the fun continues throughout the week. Thursday, by the way, I should mention, is a fast day. Shavasar B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, which marks the day that kind of the handwriting was on the wall for the destruction of the temple. The siege, I think they broke down the walls of Jerusalem. The breach happened on that day, and it took 3 weeks until the temple was destroyed. So it begins a period of mourning, and so that begins on Thursday, the 17th of Tammuz. It's a half-day fast, meaning it starts in the morning and it ends at night, and so just wanted to put it out there. And we usually have a lunch and learn on the first Thursday of each English month at the Dupree, but that's with food, and we're not going to do it this week. Oh, good question. Do we avoid meat? We avoid meat in the 9 days between Rosh Chodesh Av and the Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. So this begins a kind of softer period of mourning, so we try not to listen to music. We don't get haircuts. We don't. Hey, Natan, good to see you. All right. All right. Hey, you're making my day. All right, this is good. I'm going to give you a hug in a second. So yeah, so it begins like we don't listen to music, we don't go to concerts, whatever. And then the 9 days is even a little bit more restrictive, and then that culminates with Tisha B'Av. And hopefully this year we won't need it, because we'll have Mashiach, and we'll have the celebration. Let us say Amen. Good to see you all. Shavua Tov. All right.